welcome to the Sporticos Football Stories podcast. My name is Craig Hanson, and today I'm joined by Scott McCarthy, a lifelong Brighton and Hove Albion supporter and football writer who's been covering the Seagulls since 2009 on wearebrighton.com and for various other news outlets. He's followed the club through thick and thin across 4 divisions and 4 different home stadiums, and will surely have a story or two to tell about his beloved club. I can't wait to get into all of that today on the Sporticos Football Stories podcast. Hey Scott, how you doing?
I'm not too bad, thank you. How are you?
Not too bad. I just got back from Warsaw. Just watched the mighty Legia Warsaw beat Spartak Moscow away from home. Well, I didn't watch it live in person, of course, but watched it on TV with a bunch of Poles, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Caught up with a bit of Champions League action. What about yourself? Did you watch any of the games last night?
I didn't know. I've sort of been flat out working at the minute. It's non-stop, transfer window shuts, games coming thick and fast. It's just endless at the minute.
Okay, so first thing I wanted to get into with you today, Scott, we normally like to ask our guests a little bit about their beginnings as a fan. So I wondered if you could just introduce me to the first game you went to as a Brighton fan. I know that I know that Brighton have had a lot of change over the last 30 or 40 years. So where were you? Who took you? How old were you? All that kind of stuff when you first went.
That's quite a difficult question to answer because I got taken to my first game when I was about 2 years old by my parents. So obviously I've got absolutely no recollection of that. It was I think it was in the 1989-90 season. Year later, we got to the playoff final. I can sort of remember going to Wembley as like would have been, as a 3-year-old. I remember sort of having my face painted and remember it being absolutely massive compared to the Goldstone, and just it being everyone was excited because it was a good day out, and everyone was upset because we got dicked by Notts County. And I guess I can recall actually going to games from about 1994, which was a pretty bad time for it to happen, really, because that was the season before the Goldstone ground got sold. We nearly went out of business. We were playing in the bottom division, finished second bottom of the Football League. And so, it's been quite a journey from there all the way to the top of the Premier League, through 4 home grounds. I've been to the Goldstone. I went to home games in Gillingham, season ticket at Withdean, season ticket at the Amex. So, seen it all, I guess you could say.
What was the story in Gillingham? Did you have one of those Coventry type situations where you were losing the ground and or you had to go there for a season or 2 seasons? What happened there?
Yeah, so essentially, we were taken over. Brighton was about to go out of business because of unpaid tax bills, etc., in about 1993. And a businessman from Lancashire called Bill Archer paid £56 to buy the club, which at the time seemed brilliant. He kept us in business. He was quite rich, fantastic. Turned out in 1995 that he had sold the ground to developers. Not only had he done that, but there used to be what was called a non-profit clause in the Articles of Association. So if Brighton went out of business, no one individual or any individuals could profit from the club. Any money that was in their bank account had to go to local Sussex non-league clubs or charities, basically. He removed that clause so that when he sold the ground for 8 or 9 million, he could then personally take the money along with David Baloch, the chief executive, and Greg Stanley, who was the president. So we basically, supporters found out about that through a stroke of luck, really. An accountant named Paul Samra looked into the Articles of Association. They realised that the ground had been sold. So 2 years later, we were basically forced out of our home. We moved to Gillingham for 2 years while a man who took over, Dick Knight, took over from Bill Archer after a very, very long battle to get him out of the club. Played at Gillingham for 2 years. We then came back to Withdean Stadium, which was an athletics track, held 8,000 people, no roof, absolutely ghastly to watch football in. That was meant to be a temporary stay, which ended up lasting 11 years before the Amex was built. And then, yeah, we've sort of been flying ever since. So the club was, it came so close to going out of business. It doesn't even bear thinking about it. To be where we are now is a massive achievement.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of stories of clubs going, I don't know, sort of through the leagues and from League One and double promotions, but that kind of changed. I mean, the stadium that you're in now in the Amex, it's state of the art, right? It's beautiful. It's something to be proud of. And to think that you came from 11 years playing in that ground, which you said basically wasn't even fit for watching football.
Yeah, I mean, I think we played Huddersfield once and Lou Mackay was their manager and he said it was like playing a pre-season game in Scandinavia, running track round it, no roof. I mean, when it rained, you got absolutely soaked. It was grim. It was a miracle really that, the club survived that because there was no income coming in really. I mean, 5,000 fans and then we managed to survive it. And then Tony Bloom came along, who's our current chairman, obviously very, very rich. He paid for the Amex, paid for a squad that was good enough to win League One, paid for a squad good enough to get in the Premier League. And now we've got a squad that, is competing in the Premier League. There's other clubs who've done it, obviously, but I think it's just such a massive turnaround that you wouldn't have thought possible even, 15 years ago.
Yeah, it could be the biggest one because, like I said, we've seen stories like that, but not quite on that level that almost out of business, almost out the league, the stadium issue. But I guess I wanted to ask you quickly again about the Gillingham thing. So I didn't realise Gillingham was so close to Brighton. So were they? Is it close? Were they like a local? That's a weird situation.
It's not close at all. It was a 75-minute journey one way, 75 mile journey back. So we were, there was 2,000 fans going every week at most, doing 150 miles and you can't get there directly. So if you're driving, you're up the M23, along the M25, down the M2. If you're going by train, you're into London, back out of London. It was, arguably the worst place we could have gone. I think we tried to move in with Portsmouth, but that didn't happen. And then Millwall was muted, which would have been a lot easier because it's, a couple of stops up the line on the train. That never happened either. So yeah, it was, and this was before Gillingham's ground was redeveloped. I mean, it's not great now, the Priestfield, but back then it was an absolute hole. So it wasn't like we were going somewhere nice for our hour and a half journey to get to a home game.
Unbelievable stuff. Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about being a Brighton fan as a kid during that time. So you mentioned the kind of the trials and tribulations and being not only lower league football, but, on the precipice of dropping out of the league and these crazy stadium changes. Did you find that most of the kids in the school also followed Brighton, or was there a lot of kind of, Chelsea fans or whoever the big London team was at the time? Were you one of the few in the school, or did most of the kids stay loyal to the local team?
No, I think there was maybe, 2 kids in my year at school who supported Brighton. Everyone else was Man United, because obviously that was just before they won the treble. So
yeah,
Liverpool as well, and the London clubs. But now it's such a difference because, I mean, you used to go out in Brighton and you would see, when I was a kid, and you'd see nobody walking around wearing a Brighton shirt. These days, there's Brighton shirts everywhere. And again, that's not even, that since we've had the Amex, that's happened. It's absolutely mind blowing to see it. And because the potential is there for the club. I mean, there's no other club. The nearest club's north is Palace, that's 50 miles away. You go the other way to Pompey, that's 50 miles. Sussex is a huge catchment area for building up support, and it's good to see it's finally happening.
Yeah, well, I guess that's probably the reason why Bloom invested, right? He must have seen. Well, I'm sure there's many reasons, but he probably saw that there's a huge potential, right, for making money, for generating fans, and not only is there not a lot of competition, I guess, with local rivals, but also it's a beautiful city. It's it's kind of like, I mean, I love Brighton. I think it's famous, I would say, right, in the country for being an amazing place to go. So seems like a perfect club to invest in. Yeah, and we do get a lot of people coming over. From one of the guys who writes for our website is Dutch. He was a Feyenoord supporter. Now he's came to Brighton once, fell in love with the place, supports Brighton now. It has that effect on people. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. But I guess another thing I wanted to ask was, all football fans are fickle. We're all fickle. We all kind of forget about the past and the hardships, and we just we've been in the Premier League for 4 or 5 years now. We want more signings, more transfers. We should be getting up there. We should be 8th or whatever. Is it easier for you to kind of just bask in how brilliant it is right now to be a Brighton fan when you look back over all the years and all the stuff that you've seen?
Yeah, and it's actually very, very interesting that, because there's been quite a bit of debate recently. Obviously, fans of my generation who've done the Goldstone, done with Dean, we've never had it so good. So, when we lose a few games, it's not the end of the world. But we're at the stage now where we've been at the Amex for 10 years. So, a kid who goes to his first game at the Amex was 8 years old. They're 18 now. They've known nothing but Brighton B success. We've had one season where we struggled in the Championship under Sami Hyypiä. And other than that, it's just been progress. So when we do hit a speed bump, when we do lose games, it's unusual to them. And it's actually sparked a little bit of a divide, because you've got some fans saying, stop moaning, it's never been this good. And other fans saying, well, how long is this going to go on? Are we going to be saying, we could end up relegated to League One in 10 years' time or whatever? Will we still be saying, well, it's better than when we were, bottom of the Football League? So it's interesting that there's that sort of divide between the generations. And I don't think there's any other club in the country who's got that, because our attendances went from 8,000 to nearly 30,000 overnight when we moved to the Amex. So the crowd quadrupled. You've then got people who, and that's happened, it's a bit of a sore point with some Brighton fans. People will say, oh, half the Brighton crowds used to support Arsenal, or Brighton are just their second team. But I don't see that as a bad thing, because if you've got Chelsea supporters, Man United supporters coming to the Amex now, they take their kids are brought up as Brighton fans, and that's how you grow a football club.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic thing, and it must be the quality of football as well. Must be crazy for you, because I go and watch my local team, Warsaw, who you probably have heard of because of the League 2 days and well, back in the day, Division 2, Division 3 days, and it's not bad, but you go and watch a game at 3:00 there, and then you come home and watch the 5:30 kickoff or whatever, Liverpool versus Chelsea. It's like watching like you're in space. What's it like watching the level of player that you've got now and the style of football? Looking back in the dark old days, it must have been hoofball.
It's crazy.
Week.
When we played Brentford on Saturday, we had 10 full internationals starting in our starting lineup. That's never happened before for Brighton ever. And I just remember, I remember when England beat Germany 5-1 in Munich. Brighton were playing Northampton that day, and here we are 20 years later, and we've got internationals all over the place. We've had Ben White play for England, Lewis Dunk play for England. It's mind blowing.
Yep, it's an amazing thing. One thing I wanted to touch on with you especially was the rivalries. So I know, like you said, it's not the kind of place where you've got a bunch of teams really close together, and there's not, I guess, so much that local rivalry. And for a lot of people, you've probably been asked this question a million times, but I still don't quite understand it, even though I've watched YouTube videos about it. Can you explain the Palace thing? Because you've got the rivalry with Palace. For me, it's a bit mental. What exactly is that?
It all sort of started in the 70s. We were both in the old Division 3, so what is now League One. And Palace appointed Terry Venables as their manager. We appointed Alan Muller as ours, and they had a massive falling out when they were at Spurs as players over who got the captaincy. So that they basically had an individual rivalry, and then we started climbing the divisions together. So we played each other, I think, 5 times in one season, because there was FA Cup replays, and there was one game at Stamford Bridge, a second FA Cup replay, where Palace won 1-0, but Brian Horton scored a penalty for us, and the referee made him retake it for encroachment, even though it was the Brighton player encroaching. It was the Palace player encroaching, so there was no advantage gained. Mallory went mad at the end. Palace fan throws hot coffee over him. He threw a 5 on the floor, started flicking the V's at the Palace fans, going, "That's all you're worth." And it's that's where it all started. And then obviously Palace were called the Eagles. They'd come down, shout "Eagles, Eagles." That's where our nickname comes from, because Brighton fans started replying with "Seagulls, Seagulls." Then we ended up in the top flight together, and it's just sort of escalated from there. Funnily enough, Chris Hughton's brother, Henry Hughton, put in an absolute horror tackle one year to break Jerry Ryan, one of the most popular Brighton players ever. He broke his leg, never played again. There was a game where there was 5 penalties in one match, and I think 3 of them were missed. And it just sort of escalated from that. So it's not a derby or a rivalry based on location. It's based on a set of historical events that all sort of have led to there being such hatred between the two clubs.
But from the sound of it, equally bitter through the years. And do you think that the current generation, you mentioned there, those younger fans that have only ever seen the Amex, is it still as strong for them? Do they get it?
Yeah, arguably, I think it's stronger for them than it is for sort of people like me who were caught in the middle, because I didn't see my first Palace game until 2002, because obviously they were, when we were right down the bottom, they were enjoying their time in the Premier League and they were miles apart. So I went the best part of, over 10 years supporting Brighton without ever seeing a Palace game or, understanding really what the rivalry was about. And talk about a first game, my first Palace game, we lost 5-0 at Selhurst. So that was quite an introduction. But yeah, so then we played each other sort of sporadically after that. And it's only since we went into the Championship really that the games have become more regular. The rivalries, kicked up again, and a whole new generation sort of understands it more, I think.
Well, moving on a little bit now, kind of further on in your journey from not so much when you were a little kid, but maybe into your adolescence. I understand that I think you not only watch them at home, but you've been away with them a fair bit as well, Brighton, over the years.
Yeah. I think sort of the League One title season, I did basically every away game. It's a bit more difficult in the Premier League now, I'm a bit older and stuff, and have other commitments, but I still get to a fair few games. And yeah, in a way, I much prefer away games to home games, because it's, the day out, the can of beer on the train at 8 o'clock in the morning. And we're sort of quite lucky, because we're lucky in a way, but unlucky in another way, because there's no other clubs around us. Every sort of away game further north than London's a bit of a day out and an adventure. It's not like we've, got 4 or 5 games on our doorstep to go to, which are practically like home games. There's nothing like that for us.
Yeah, you're kind of like on an island in a way, aren't you? Everything's far away for you. So you get that adventure atmosphere, and you get the better atmosphere in the ground, don't you? Because away support's always a bit more, intense, I think, than sometimes home support can be. It's only the hardcores go away, right?
Yeah, it's sort of, when we've had days out, like speaking of Walsall, like when we won the League One title at Walsall, that was just incredible. 3,000 Brighton fans were there, and everyone's been, drinking beer on the train, expecting that we're going to be crowned champions today, and stuff like that. I think it's fantastic. Give me that over a Reading away in the Championship or whatever.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's what I wanted to come on to now. What would you say is your favourite away ground that you've been to? And maybe it could be something like that where it's based on a particular memory that you experienced there, or just generally you've been to this ground over and over through the years, but for some reason or another, you just really like going to that ground.
I absolutely love Carlisle away, which is going to sound mad for a support of a Premier League side, isn't it? But yeah, it's because it's just, it was such an adventure. It's a 5 o'clock train out of Brighton. You're not getting there till midday. The train goes through, the Peak District, the Lake District, all the hills. You get there, you've had God knows how many cans when you get there, and it's just sort of, it was always an adventure. And I always liked Carlisle as a place because there's good pubs. The stories you could tell. There was one year when we went all the way there, and I drank so much on the train up. I fell asleep on the toilet for 20 minutes in the ground. I had to check the score the next day on Sky Sports to see what we'd done, because I couldn't remember the game. We drew 0-0 though, so it wasn't like I missed anything. But just days like that, in a way, I'd like us to go back down to, League One and League Two, because the away days are so much more fun.
Yeah, I guess it becomes a little bit like, obviously you want to watch the game, and the game's obviously important, but in a way it's all the stuff around it that makes the day, right? The trip, like you said, it's not just about watching the match itself, it's about the whole experience.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I love going, it's an honour to see Brighton play at places like Anfield and Old Trafford, and because you go to places like that and you can feel the history of the stadium, and you think, wow, all the greats who've played there and stuff. But at the same time, I remember going to Tranmere about 4 days before Christmas in 2008, and we lost 1-0 to a last-minute goal. That put us in the League One relegation zone. It was absolutely chucking it down with rain. So me and two of my mates we were outside the away end, just didn't have a clue where we were going, like arguing with each other. Car pulls up, this Tranmere fan, jump in, lads, I'll give you a lift to the station. In we're back to the station, train back to Liverpool, and then we end up on the train back from Liverpool to London with the UK women's volleyball team in our carriage. So football may have been rubbish, 90 minutes of rubbish, but a fantastic day out.
Yeah, the kind of stories that you get, I guess, and the kind of... I remember one time, I don't know if you'd remember this guy, because I'm like... Well, we're about the same age, I think, but still, maybe no one else watched this, but do you remember a guy called Pete Waterman? He did, like, what was that thing before X Factor? I think it was called Pop Stars, when I was about 7. And anyway, he was on TV. He was like a judge on this Simon... He was next to Simon Cowell and stuff like that, I think, when I was like 6 or 7. And we watched Walsall play Coventry away. And he was next to me in the stand. It was really cool. And he was on TV all the time. And I remember I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh, it's Pete from TV. But it's the kind of weird things that you can experience, I guess. But I wanted you to describe Brighton as a fan base as well, because, different fans have different reputations, whether they're deserved or not. I mean, I think Millwall are kind of notorious for, rightly or wrongly, for in a negative way. Man City, I think, at least nowadays, kind of, no one's no one's going. It's half empty. There's not very much passion, at least since they left Main Road. Liverpool with the whole, with the cop and everything, and with the "you'll never walk alone" and all that. Do you think the Brighton fans have like a particular identity, and how would you describe that? How would you describe them as a group of people?
It's a good away day and a friendly place to go. So I guess we're quite a friendly club. Whether that's a good thing or not is obviously up for debate, because you want your ground to be intimidating, like Millwall. I mean, speaking of Millwall, we played our FA Cup quarter-final there, and it's probably the best atmosphere I've ever been in my life. 18,000 in the Den was just, it sounded like, 50,000 in there. It was absolutely crazy. So, yeah, I guess it's quite hard to put a label on us, and that also comes down to the fact that the fan base has changed since we moved to the Amex because of the size it's grown to. Before that, we always used to be known as a campaigning fan base, because we were one of the first clubs to go through this whole nightmare ownership thing, and we fought to save our club. So we supported Wrexham when they had their troubles, Plymouth, Blackpool, teams like that, Charlton. We've always been willing to lend a hand and help out where we can to try and keep clubs in business, because we know what it's like to be on the other end of it.
And I guess you kind of laid down the blueprint for a lot of that stuff as well. Kind of pioneered it. Yeah,
because Maidstone slipped out of business and Aldershot went. That was a little bit different because it was more financial than bad ownership. But we were the first club really for an owner to look at us and think, right, there's an opportunity here to asset strip an institution and profit the money. And I guess no businessman saw it as an opportunity before, because the Premier League didn't exist. And before the Premier League, there wasn't all this money. Nobody would have thought, no middle-class businessman's thinking, I want to invest in football, because they probably didn't understand the opportunities there. Once it happened to us, it happened to Doncaster very shortly after. Similar sort of thing, their chairman tried to burn down the main stand so that he could develop the ground. It was just crazy. And then obviously, Charlton, the Oystons at Blackpool, it's all sort of stemmed from us. And it's a bit of a miracle, isn't it, that the only, Bury are the only team really that have fallen by the wayside in the last 25 years, because there's been so many unscrupulous owners try it.
Yeah, obviously it's a tragedy, but like you said, it's a miracle they're the only one. And I feel like, I don't know if they are looking at that or changing it, but they really need to be more careful with the kind of people they let come in and run clubs, because not only those examples, but way less catastrophic, but stuff like, Venky's at Blackburn, and what was the guy at Cardiff who wanted to change the whole crest and colour scheme and everything?
Yeah, he looked like a Bond villain, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. I can't remember his name, but there's so many of these examples of just the kind of people they let come in just doing crazy stuff. But to go back to the Brighton fans, do you feel that now you're in the Amex and not only Brighton, but in general, as kind of the upper echelons of the game in England, especially in the Premier League. It's kind of like, it's a little bit, it's a good thing for the most part, I think, but it's a little bit like sterile, I guess, now. A little bit like Disney-fied a little bit. And I think that's a good thing, because I do think, you want it to be, families to go. You don't want to have trouble or any nonsense like that. But you sometimes, as a fan, you could look back and think maybe in the past it was a bit more intense and passionate and stuff. But do you think would that be accurate in regards to Brighton? Or do you think that at the Amex there's still just as much of a raw, or even more maybe, passion, noise, and everyone's really into it?
No, it's very, very sterile, unless it's sort of, I think it's like that everywhere there, unless it's a massive game. So when Palace come down, for example, there's a hell of an atmosphere. When we played Sheffield Wednesday in the playoff semi-final, second leg of the year, we should have gone up. We'd gone to Hillsborough 4 days earlier and had 4 players come off injured, which was completely unheard of. So we finished with 10. Obviously, some of the players were rushed back and they were, walking wounded, limping along. And the atmosphere that night was absolutely incredible to try and, push them on. So, it is, the Amex is the sort of place where you can get a good atmosphere, but it doesn't happen too often. Although, interestingly, it has been better since lockdown. And I think that's because I think people used to take for granted, rocking up there every 2 weeks to watch football. It was just sort of it didn't seem like you just sort of expected it to happen. Now people have realised, whoa, it's been 18 months. Let's actually go along and enjoy ourselves, make an atmosphere and see what happens. Because the Watford game was a great atmosphere there.
Yeah, definitely. We all got complacent, I think, with that. Maybe now people will appreciate it a little bit more. But yeah, I don't know why. It seems like in other, I don't want to say other countries because there's not that many examples of it, but I guess I've only been to a couple of Bundesliga games in person, but I've watched a load on TV. But it feels like, there's loads of money over there and the stadiums are state of the art, they're modern, it's beautiful. But they still have this really kind of, I don't know, really good fan culture. It's loud, like the games I've been to at least. And I just, I don't know, I wonder why that is. It feels like some grounds, I think, still have it, especially the big ones like Anfield and Old Trafford and stuff. But then some others, I don't want to just beat Man City all the time, you know what I mean? Because to be honest, they're kind of one of the clubs I follow. But it feels like, you watch it on TV and it's like, I don't know, why is it so quiet and why is half the ground empty? When you're playing the second or third best team in Germany, it's a massive game. Why do you think that, I don't know, we're losing a little bit of the passion over here? Do you think we are? And if so, why do you think so?
I think it goes back to it depends the sort of what game it is. I mean, I can't imagine the Etihad, if that was a semi-final, it's not empty, is it? There's an atmosphere there. And I think it's sort of maybe an element of boredom because, when City first got in the Champions League, this is all fresh, this is new, fantastic. We're playing in Europe, it's unbelievable. Now they've been doing it for a decade and they're playing, Red Bull Leipzig, who they only played a couple of seasons ago. Is there sort of that element of excitement? And going back to what you said about Germany, I think the major difference obviously is in cost because you're attracting not that I want to sort of put class labels or anything on it, but if you're charging supporters £10 or £20 to come in, they can pay £4 for a beer, drink throughout the game. You're attracting a very, very different sort of person to the one who goes to the Premier League and, for example, pays £45 for a match ticket at Brighton. It comes down to price, I think, and that's not something that will be fixed because as long as there's a demand for people to pay those prices and as people are paying them, why on earth would you lower them?
No, 100%. You're right. I didn't really think of that, and it's true. And I don't really see a remedy anyway because I don't want to alienate families and kids and stuff. But I feel like in the past when I was a kid, you did have you still had kids there, but it was different. I mean, in the Warsaw ground, we had the family stand, which was dedicated to the families kind of thing, and then you'd have the behind the goal where it's really, really, hardcore, and then the other stand would be kind of mid, and then you'd have the away, But yeah, I don't know exactly how we fix that, but it just feels like we're kind of, it's changing a little bit. But anyway, to get back to Brighton and the fans, I feel like Brighton have a really good reputation as well as being a really inclusive club, really progressive club. Do you think that's accurate? And I guess if so, how long's that been the case? Was it always like that? Or is it something new?
It sort of came to light when Brighton basically got Brighton's always been quite a liberal city. It's always been welcome to anyone. But when it basically got branded as, the gay capital of Britain, that was when we started getting a lot of homophobic abuse from other fans. We'd go to away games and there'd be all the "does your boyfriend know you're here?" and other unspeakable chants that I'm not gonna mention. And from there, I think that the club's answer to that was, okay, people think this about us, let's become like it. So it did sort of become very, very inclusive. They do a lot on sort of football versus homophobia, the Rainbow Laces campaign, stuff like that. But I think that's just because of, the city we are. Brighton is some would say it's a bit too liberal. There's all kinds of nonsense going on with people like pretending they're vegetables and, stuff like that. So, but yeah, and I think and that's probably another reason why outsiders quite like Brighton as a football club, because it reflects the city as it is. It stands for the city, and there's not many. We're quite lucky because we're a one club city as well. So there's not many other places where you would have an entire city supporting one team, which is obviously the dream for Brighton. Maybe Newcastle, and that's about it really. And or maybe Sunderland and places like that up north, where it's a bit more ingrained in them through through family ties. But nothing sort of like, there isn't a club down the south that has that, whereas we've got the potential to do it.
This might be a difficult thing to decide, but what would you say is your favourite memory watching Brighton in person, home or away? Because I know that often when I ask this question, someone will just say, oh, well, it was, the big trophy we won like last year or something. But I don't think it's always that simple, because it could be a case of the experience you had, something special that happened. But do you have a game that stands out that is your absolute favourite game you've watched in person?
I guess the obvious one that most people would pick would be the first game at the Amex, because we'd waited 14 years since the Goldstone had shut to have our own ground, and it was absolutely perfect because we basically, our new £1.5 million signing, we'd never paid over £1 million for a player before. Will Buckley went and scored in the 96th minute to win it, and that was a pretty good day. But I think my favourite game is probably when we beat Chesterfield. So I was 13 or 14 to win the Division 3 title as it was then. So that would be League 2 now. Because Brighton had always been rubbish throughout my entire life, and that was the first time I'd ever seen us win a trophy, and it just felt like this is what it's actually meant to be like, to be a football fan, not embarrassed, but not to be the only Brighton fan in your school. We won promotion, we'd won a trophy, and it felt special.
Yeah, it's a big day, and I guess a big pitch invasion probably.
Yeah, and it was a Tuesday night, so I had school the next day as well, which was obviously made it a little bit. I was absolutely knackered the next day, and I can still see the goal now. So Paul Watson swung over a corner, Danny Collett leaping like a salmon, running off to the fans, everyone on the pitch, and then they presented the trophy afterwards. And that was only 4 years after the Goldstone had been sold. So, even 4 years ago, to see Brighton win a trophy would have seemed completely out of this world as well. And it was the start of, we won the Division 2 title the next season. So it was the catalyst really for us to start making moves up the league.
And I know that surely the Amex is probably like technically the best stadium that you've been in during these various stadium changes. But do you hold out any nostalgia, not for your couple of seasons in Gillingham, but for the old ground, or for the old grounds, I should say?
Yeah, I think sort of Withdean was obviously a complete dump and a nightmare, but it was so quirky that, there's stuff that people still miss. So there was a pub.
It was your dump and your nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. There was a pub directly behind one of the stands, which was actually part of the ground, and it used to sell it used to do a carvery for $3.99. So it's one of these like Toby Carvery things, but a less good version of Toby Carvery, if Toby Carvery can be ever considered good.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone would flock in there for a £4 carvery before the game, and there was a bacon baguette van in the ground, and the bacon baguettes were absolutely horrible. It looked like something had died inside of it, but people still hark back to oh yeah, do you remember the bacon baguette and stuff like? There's one game when it absolutely chucked it down, and the pitch was a quagmire, and Richard Carpenter went to do a slide tackle against Luton, and he just slipped, and he must have been sliding for about 40 yards, slid straight off the pitch, and there was yeah, and every time, because it was an athletic stadium, there's a hammer net behind the goal. If someone somehow put a shot in the hammer net, everyone would celebrate like it was a goal. There was a bloke who used to watch from the woods behind the stand, let off a firework whenever Brighton scored. He had to stop that, though, because one day the firework went awry, dropped into the stand, nearly set someone on fire. So,
jeez.
Like memories like that, just there's a certain element that, yeah, Withdean was absolutely ghastly, but at the same time, it was, they were bloody fun times as well.
There's sometimes the craziness with fireworks and flares and that can get a bit too far. When I was speaking to a Legia guy the other night, and he told me that he was harping back to the old days when they used to have crazy fans and all the 90s hooligans and all that. And he said that not only did they used to light flares, but this one guy used to have like a gun that he used to shoot them out of. And then if it's like if it goes wrong, it can just go like woo and then drop. Just land in the middle of the people. I mean, imagine you're standing there watching the game and a flare drops on your head. I
went to the Moscow derby in 2009 and people they weren't even like flares off. People were actually letting off actual Catherine wheels like in the seats. And I don't really like fireworks. And I was absolutely crapping myself when this was going on, thinking we're going to get set on fire or it's going to explode or something.
Yeah, that's too far. I'm all for a bit of, intense kind of, like you said, Millwall at the Den or... just kind of a real vibe, but I don't need...
not Russian Guy Fawkes.
Exactly. I don't need that going on next to me. Anyway, before we come on to the current state of the squad, because I do want to touch on a little bit of that with you and a little bit about this season, we're going to take a very quick break. And we're back. So the first question I have as far as the modern era, bearing in mind that, again, I'm not a Brighton fan, so I know very little about Brighton, so I'm here to learn from you. What was the feeling among the fans in general? I know you can't speak for everyone, but in general, when Chris Hughton was let go? I mean, did people feel that it was too soon, or did they feel that even though they were sad about it, it was the right time?
Yeah, I think it was. It's a funny one because normally when a manager gets sacked from a club, the supporters, they're happy about it. Whereas with us, it was it felt like a natural time for him to go because he takes him to the Premier League, which only Alan Mullery had ever done before. He'd kept us there. But in that second half of the season, the turning point was a lot of people were moaning about, the negative football and the defensive football, but we had to play that way to stay up. So it got to December, the end of December, and he moved from his 4-4-1-1 formation, which was, by definition quite negative. Murray up top by himself, Gross just behind. Tried to play 4-3-3, which didn't really work. And the problem that we had was that everyone could see within a month that it wasn't working, but Hughton persevered with it until basically the end of April. So we won only 2 games of 19 in the second half of that season, which obviously, if you replicate that over an entire campaign, that's relegation form. And I think, Hughton's biggest problem was that he was too stubborn he didn't want to admit, right, I've cocked up here by changing the way we play, changing the formation. He should have gone back to 4-4-1-1, which he knew worked a lot sooner than he did. And if he had done that, maybe he would have kept his job. I think the turning point for a lot of fans was we played Bournemouth and Cardiff at home in the space of 72 hours. Obviously, they were both relegation rivals. We got tonked 5-0 by Bournemouth. We then lost 2-0 to Cardiff. And it just looked like, he'd run out of ideas. The players had run out of ideas. So I think come the end of that season, he had to go. And it was sad that he went, but for the good of the club, I think that we then had to obviously try and, you can't just keep playing defensive football. At some point, you've got to progress and move up the league, which is why Potter was brought in. And I think the only regret that a lot of Brighton fans would have had is that it wasn't announced beforehand that Hughton would be going at the end of the season, because Bruno retired in our final game against Manchester City. got a fantastic reception, and Houghton deserved to have an even bigger send-off for everything he'd done for the club. Instead, he oversaw a 4-1 loss, and then the next day it was just announced that he'd been sacked. Whereas and we still haven't said goodbye to him, because obviously he hasn't been back with Forest, and now he's gone from Forest anyway. It would have been nice for us to give him the reception he deserved and the thanks he deserved.
Yeah, you might never get the chance now as well, because who knows how his career is going to go. I hope not. I hope he bounces back and gets himself a sort of mid-table championship side, makes a playoff run, and then gets back in the Prem and can come and visit you. But as you said, I think it's right to say that he's loved by the club, right? Remembered very fondly. But it was the right time to go, and in came Potter. How optimistic were you when the announcement was made? So I know it's hard to do, but taking away everything you've seen, you saw the name. Maybe, I mean, in your case, you probably knew a fair bit about his time in Sweden, but what was the general kind of vibe in the fan base? How optimistic were people that things were going to improve?
It's difficult, really, because, with hindsight, everyone will say it was a decision that had to be made. It's a fantastic decision. We all knew it was going to be brilliant. But there was also, I remember at the time, I was very concerned, because you look at other clubs who've got rid of a safe pair of hands in trying to become more attacking or play more progressive football, and it's absolutely killed them. Charlton got rid of Kirbishley, and look what happened to them. Same thing with Stoke and Pulis. Palace is a great example. They got rid of Pulis thinking, right, in comes De Boer, fantastic. Lost their first 7 games of the season without scoring a goal. So
luckily, they acted fast and saved themselves, at least.
Yeah, say luckily.
Well, not for you.
Yeah, so there was obviously a huge element of risk attached to it. But at the same time, it was a risk I think the club had to take. And thankfully, it appears like they've got the appointment right. But there have been times over the past 2 seasons where I think you would have doubted whether it was the right one, because, Potter is a manager earning a job, and he has made quite a few mistakes. But whereas another club might have, pulled the trigger and said, right, let's get rid, got nervous because they'd only won 2 in 19. I mean, Potter's overseen runs of 2 wins in 19 twice so far, and that's obviously the same form Houghton went for. Other clubs might have said, not working out, but we stuck with him in it. So far this season, touchwood, it looks like it's reaping the rewards.
Would you say that has he exceeded expectations?
It's hard to say, really, because in terms of overhauling the squad, we had a very old squad under Houghton. We've now got a young, exciting squad. Yet ticks that box. He has introduced the football we play is a world away from what it was under Houghton. Tick that box. But if you're looking at sort of progress in terms of results and league positions, we finished 15th in Potter's first season, which is as high as we finished under Houghton. We then slipped to 16th last year. And for me, I look at the squad we had last season. You've got Bissouma, who could go for 60 million. White has gone for 50 million. Lamptey, when fit, is absolute class. Robert Sanchez in goals been a massive find. Lallana and Welbeck on their day, quality. We've got a squad that, for me, I think last season should have been doing better than 16th. So in that regard, it was a little bit of an underachievement. But then you look at it, and I cannot stand XG. I have nightmares about it still. If we had have played up to our XG last season, we would have finished, we could have finished potentially as high as 5th. So he's obviously doing something right, and perhaps the missing ingredient was just that clinical centre forward that we need to kick us on to the next level. This season we're performing to our XG, and we're 6th in the league. So let's see where we are in around Christmas time.
Yeah, maybe you finally cracked it, that final last little piece that you needed, because as much as XG is the go-to stat, Brighton are the go-to club for XG, aren't they? They're the go-to example of...
The proof that it's complete nonsense.
Exactly, yeah, but maybe this year could be the proof that after all it had some sense. So you mentioned a few players, you mentioned several players there that are contributing in a big way. Who do you think was a standout performer last season, in your opinion? Who was the most important player in the squad?
I think I'd nominate 2. I mean, Bissouma's just out of this world. I've never seen a player as good as him play for Brighton. I doubt I ever will again. He just, when you watch sort of a world-class player, you can tell they're world-class because they see stuff happen before it happens. He's always in the right place. He what he does is he wins you back the ball before the opposition know he's there, and then he'll put you on the front foot before they can react to what he's doing. It's just, he's incredible to watch, and I cannot believe someone hasn't come in and put in a massive bid for him, because he would walk into an Arsenal without a doubt. He would improve a Liverpool. He would probably go into a City and not look out of place. He's that good. I think also crucial to us last season and very underrated was Pascal Gross. In the first half of the season, we won 2 games out of 18, as I already said. I think Gross only started 5 games maybe. Potter didn't like him for whatever reason. Second half of the season, he came in and we survived, ended up avoiding relegation relatively comfortably, whereas before he was in the side, we looked like we might have been dragged in, we might have gone down.
And how do you see the team getting on this year? I know it's difficult to make a prediction for an exact position, but it's looking good so far. It looks like maybe finally Potter's methods are going to pay off. I mean, I think that's what the neutral would think, but as a fan, someone who's seen it all before, how do you reckon you'll get on?
The difference with this season compared to last season is that last season we didn't beat any of the sides around us apart from Newcastle. So we beat none of the bottom 4 who finished below us. We beat hardly anyone above us. This season we've already knocked off Burnley and Watford and Brentford, who you would expect to be in and around the relegation zone with us. So we're winning games this season that we wouldn't have done last season. And whereas last season, we beat City, we beat Liverpool, we beat Spurs. We were able to go toe to toe with the better clubs in the league because of the way we play. They would come and attack. That suited us because we couldn't break sides down. This season, we seem to have developed a knack of finding a way to get through the lesser sides, which is why we've got 9 points on the board already. So if we can combine that with last season's ability to take on the big boys, there's no reason why we can't finish in the top 10.
Well, I'm happy to hear that optimism, and I do agree. I think most neutrals would agree as well that, at least on paper, you mentioned some of the quality that's in the squad and the manager. I do think that, like you said, he had some bad runs there, but there's definitely, he has the potential to be a really exciting young coach, and I think that I would say you definitely should be looking for sort of 12th, 13th or above. But I mean, what would represent like a successful season? Are you still, given all the perspective that you've got from your life, are you still sort of in the camp of avoiding relegation is always a success?
So Tony Bloom, the chairman's got a publicly stated ambition that he wants to establish Brighton as a top 10 Premier League side. We know that's not going to happen overnight because we don't have, the funds to compete with the big clubs. So for me, a successful season is progress on the previous year. That's why I think last season was a bit disappointing, because we achieved 41 points, which is the same amount, but we went from 15th to 16th. So there was, at best we stood still, at worst we went backwards. So for this season, I think a successful season for me is anything over 15th in the table and eclipsing those 41 points. And based on what we've seen so far, we should be able to do that comfortably.
Okay, well, before we get into a Twitter question that we have from a Brighton fan and our little quiz that we like to end the show on, we're going to take one more really quick break. And we're back. So, before we move on to the quiz, we do have one question from Twitter from a guy called Gary Terrell.
You've got mail.
And Gary asks, why didn't Glenn Murray get to say goodbye to the fans?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? It would have been nice for him to do so, but we all thought that, when the Albion arranged a friendly for this summer, that they would let Glenn have 10 minutes or whatever and he could say goodbye, but it hasn't happened. There's also the talk of him coming back as a coach, and goodness knows we need someone to coach our strikers, and who better than the man who's scored the second most goals in Brighton history. But I think he's quite content with his media work at the minute. He's obviously doing quite well. He's all over the BBC, all over Sky. But it's the same thing with Houghton, isn't it? It would be nice to say goodbye to him. Whether we get the chance or not is up to the club, really.
I think you're right, though, about the coaching role, because maybe he could be the thing that unlocks the XG.
Yeah, and it was absolutely infuriating, because in 2017-18, 2018-19 seasons, he was something like the third most clinical striker in the Premier League. So in terms of chances that he put away, so if you put him in a Man City side, he would have scored like 25 goals. And he was basically the only reason we stayed up the first 2 seasons, because he was scoring 36, 37% of the goals we were netting. And you think in a side that created all those opportunities, even last season, people were saying, God, let's just get Murray back from Watford and put him in the side, because he's not going to miss from 2 years out like Morpie was doing, like Connolly was doing, like Jahan Bash was doing. But, almost from day one, Potter didn't seem to rate him at all. We didn't really give him an opportunity. And it's just one of those things, isn't it? Managers come in, they don't fancy a player for whatever reason, and that's the end of it. Whereas, even last season, maybe Glenn had something to offer, but I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember when you first came up, I think it's that kind of classic argument, isn't it, about a guy who scores bags of goal in the Championship, but can he do it in the Premier League? And I think that's going away a bit now, because we've seen tons of examples now of Championship strikers coming up and scoring at least 15, which I think is more than creditable. And I think Murray was doing the same, wasn't he? I could have swore he scored at least 15 in one of those first 2 seasons.
Yeah, I think he got 15 in the second one and maybe 14 in the first, but he just seemed to get better with age, because obviously we had him in League One at Withdean, and it's weird because when he scored 22 goals the season we won the League One title, and even then, fans, he wasn't like a universal hero when you think any player who scores top scores in a title-winning season should be. Then obviously Poyet decided he'd rather spend $3.5 million on Craig McHale-Smith than give Murray a minor pay rise. So he went to Palace on a free. That is obviously completely unacceptable. And even when he came back, I knew, and most Brighton fans knew, that the reason we didn't go up in 2015-16 was we were 2 goals away from automatic promotion. If we scored 2 more, we would have gone up on goal difference above Middlesbrough. You sign a bloke who's going to get you 20 goals, then obviously, and keep the same side, you're going to finish in the top 2 the next year. But people were still, I'm not sure about Murray. He's 33, and obviously the whole Palace thing was hanging over him. But he just seems to get better with age, and that's why it makes you wonder if he still could have contributed in the past 2 seasons under Potter.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, especially if you just need a goal poacher around the box, if you provide everything else. But who knows? It could have been that, like I said, I can't say I'm like an expert on Brighton's tactics, but maybe the system that you're playing, does it need legs up front? Does Mopé press a lot?
Yeah, he's absolutely all over the place. He works his socks off, and I think sort of you are right in that the system didn't really work. And Murray obviously thrives on 2 out-and-out winners, balls into the box for him to tuck away. And since we've gone to 3 at the back, we're playing wing back, so you don't sort of have the same delivery from out wide. So maybe maybe he wouldn't have worked in the system, and maybe it's a good thing that he didn't keep playing, because whereas he's now gone out on the top with people wondering, oh God, I wish maybe he could have contributed. It's better than everyone thinking, Christ almighty, why is Glenn still in the team? He should have been put out to pasture like years ago.
Yeah, it's like a boxer going out undefeated instead of just carrying on and losing 5 in a row, and then you kind of lose the legacy, don't you? It kind of tarnishes the legacy a little bit. So maybe for the best, but definitely could come back and offer something at the club, I'm sure, whether it's a coaching role or ambassadorial role. But we shall see. But before we get out of here, we're going to finish with a little quiz that we like to end the show with every week, called Do You Know Your Heroes? And I think this will be easy for you. We're going to get straight into it. A lot of these are sort of numbers-based records, but you can offer up whatever you can. But pretty much, if you have the name, then we're in business. But if you know more, that's even better. So let's get started. Which player holds the record for the most goals scored in all competitions during one single season?
That would be Peter Ward with 36, and I think it was the 76-77 season.
I told you. I think we're going to have our first 8 out of 8 here. I need to get someone to, maybe I can get a listener to actually go down and mark down all these, and we can have a league table and find out. But I think we could be looking at our first 8 out of 8. So 1 out of 8 so far. Who do the club recognise as their all-time top goal scorer?
Tommy Cook.
Correct. And how many goals?
123.
Very good. This part doesn't need to happen, but I don't suppose you know the years in which he scored those.
It was the 1920s, so between, 23 and 31 or something I'll go for.
Really close. 21 and 29, but it's 2 for 2. Definitely 2 for 2. But who is the club's all-time post-war top goal scorer?
That'd be Glenn, wouldn't it?
They would indeed. And how many?
111.
Very good. Yes, between 2008 and 2011, and then second spell 2016 to 2021. Scored 111 goals, which, as you said earlier, is the second most in the club's history and the most post-war. Which player has made the most appearances for the club?
Tug Wilson.
Very good. How many, do you know?
He's in the 500s, 540 odd. Very
close. 566 between 1922 and 1936. Ernie Tug Wilson. Very nice indeed. We're getting into a little bit more contemporary now. Brighton broke their club record transfer fee in July 2018. But for who? Who did they sign?
2018, Jahanbash.
Very good. Do you remember who from?
AZ Alkmaar.
Very nice. Do you remember the reported fee?
It was either 16 or 17 million.
17, very good. I knew this was going to be easy for you. It's not that easy for everyone, actually, because some of these are 1920s and stuff. I mean, you could tell that you're really dedicated.
Got too much time on my hands.
Okay, again, more contemporary one. Who scored the most goals in all competitions for Brighton last season?
Neil Morpie.
Very good. Do you know how many goals?
I think, was it 8?
8 in 36 total appearances in all competition. Very, very good. Very nice. And on the other hand, who provided the most assists for Brighton last season?
It's got to be Pascal Gross.
Yes, it was. Do you know how many? That's tough.
No.
It's 7 out of 8 either way.
I'll take a calculated guess and go for 10.
Very close. 8.
Same as the
8
goals.
assists. Same as the goals. And this one might be the one that catches you out, because this is a kind of fun one that this usually catches everyone out. So we're on 7 out of 8. This is for 8 out of 8. Predictably, England is the national team that is the most represented in Brighton's current first team squad, of course. Aside from England, which country do the most players originate?
Oh, God, that's a good question.
So you've got most squads, you've got a bunch of like sort of 1 and 2.
Yeah.
This particular country, there's 3 players from this country. Do you know which one it is?
Oh. I'm going to have a think here.
Quickly going through the squad in your head.
I want to say, although I can only think of a couple, Spain.
Oh, it's only 7 out of 8. This is the one that always gets them. Spain has 2, I think. I think Sanchez and can't remember the other one from my Wikipedia research. But it's actually the Netherlands with Joel Veltman, Jurgen Locadia, who I'm aware of. But this other guy I'm not so aware of, Kjell Scherpen. This could be a bit of a trick question. If he's a kid, if he's a 16-year-old, then...
No, he's our new reserve team goalkeeper we've signed. So backup goalkeeper. And to be honest, I'd forgotten about Veltman, which is an absolute shocker because he was one of our best players last season. And Locadia I've become a bit obsessed with recently because he just seems to have gone completely insane on Instagram. So I should have known that, really.
Well, it could be, I guess the Sherpen one is the curveball if he's a new signing as well and only a reserve goalie. But you did come so close. I think that's definitely the best one we've had for sure.
Yeah, I'll take 7 out of 8.
7 out of 8 is fantastic. Nearly the clean sweep. Maybe one day we'll get there. But that one, we do that one, and that always gets them. And another one is, with the bigger clubs, who was the last person to win the World Cup while playing for the team, and then you find that they're going through their head thinking, okay, who won the World Cup, and then do any of our players play for them? And all the time everyone gets that wrong. So. But all the records, you are on point, even as far back as 1922. You know the records, so I'm very impressed. Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Before we go, do you want to go into detail about where people can go and read your stuff or listen to your stuff?
Yeah, you can read the website at wearebrighton.com, and we're on Twitter, which is at We Are Brighton.
Fantastic, Scott. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure. And good luck to Brighton this weekend.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the Sporticos Football Stories podcast. Please like, share and leave positive reviews wherever you listen. We really appreciate it. Also, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please tell a friend online or offline. That really helps a small podcast like ours to grow organically. Head to sporticos.com for live streams, data, statistics and much more from the world of football. You can also follow us on Twitter at sporticos.com. You can follow myself at Craig Sporticos. And we would also love to read out the thoughts and questions of our listeners. So please feel free to tweet those to me anytime or send us an email to show@sporticos.com with your opinions or your questions, and we will get to them on the next episode. Thanks again so much to Scott for coming on today to speak to us. Thanks so much to you for listening, and see you on the next episode of the Sporticos Football Stories podcast.